Hello and welcome to this video on adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing fractions. This video is going to be a very quick overview on how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide fractions. If you'd like more info, you can peruse the links at the bottom of the page on the MathFact website. We'll start with adding fractions. If you're adding two fractions that already have the same denominator, meaning the number on the bottom of the fraction is the same, then all you need to do is add the numerators. So for example, if you have 2/5 plus 1/5, if I have two pieces of pie from a pie that's cut into 5 pieces and I add a piece from a pie that's cut into 5 pieces, I have 3 pieces out of a pie that's cut into 5 pieces. As long as your denominators are the same, you add fractions by adding the numerators and leaving the denominator the same. The problem arises when you're adding two fractions where your denominators are not the same. For example, 2/7 plus 3/14. In this instance, you need what they call a common denominator. You need to change one or both the denominators so that they are the same number. You can do this by exploiting the fraction's ability to change, meaning I'm looking for a number that both 7 and 14 can divide into evenly. The 14 can't divide into 7, but 7 divides into 14 evenly. So I want to take 7, and if I want to change that to a 14, I times it by 2. And I'm allowed to do that as long as I do that to the top of the fraction as well. So this question becomes 4/14, which is the same amount as 2/7, plus 3/14. But now I have a common denominator, and I can add those fractions together. I get 7/14. Now your teacher may discuss with you the need to reduce a final answer. 7/14 reduces to 1/2. We won't cover that in this video. You can ask your teacher if that's necessary. For one more example of getting a common denominator, let's look at 1/3 plus 4/7. 3 does not go into 7 evenly. So I'm going to start looking for multiples of 7 that is also a multiple of 3. 7 does not work. 14 does not work. But 21 is divisible by both 7 and 3. So I want to change my denominators to be 21. So I'm going to take 3 and I'm going to times it by 7. And again, I can do that as long as I do the same thing to the top of that fraction. On this fraction, to make the denominator 21, I want to multiply the 7 times 3. Whatever I do to the bottom of the fraction, I need to do to the top. This changes this question into 7 over 21, which is the same amount as a third, plus 12 over 21, which is the same amount as 4/7. And when I add my fractions, I get 19 over 21. Subtracting fractions is really the same as adding fractions together. As long as your denominators are the same, you can go ahead and subtract your fractions. 4/7 minus 1/7 leaves you with 3/7. Again, it's when your denominators are different that you have a bit of a problem. If we look at 5/6 minus 2/5, we need a common denominator. Again, a multiple of both 6 and 5 that they share. Looking at the bigger number, we have 6, which is not divisible by 5, 12, 18, 24. None of those are divisible by 5. The first number we hit that is divisible by 5 is 30. So a common denominator we could use here would be 30. So I need to multiply 6 by 5, and I do the same thing to the top. And over here, I want to change the 5 to 30. I need to multiply it by 6, and I do the same thing to the top. So I end up with 25/30 minus 12/30 leaves me with 13/30. Again, when you're adding or subtracting fractions, you need a common denominator, and you either add or subtract the top numbers as appropriate and leave the denominator the same. When you're multiplying fractions, it's actually an easier task than when you're adding or subtracting fractions because you do not require a common denominator. If we want to do a half times a third, you simply multiply the numerators. 1 times 1 is 1. And you multiply the denominators. 2 times 3 is 6. There is no need to have a common denominator. One trick your teacher might show you is how to make your life a little bit easier when multiplying fractions. If we take 3/7 times 14 over 27, 3 times 14 you may not know how to do in your head, as well as 7 times 27. You could do both of those calculations. I'm currently doing it on my calculator. You would get 42 for a numerator, and then 27 times 7 is 189. But this fraction can be reduced. In order to make this question easier on yourself, you can actually do a little bit of pre-reducing of this fraction. And again, you can ask your teacher if this step is strictly necessary. 7 divides into 14 evenly. So as long as you're multiplying, and you can only do this when you're multiplying in the middle here, you can cancel the 7 and say 7 goes into 14 twice. And 3 goes into 27. So 3 goes into 3 once, and 3 goes into 27 9 times. So you get 1 times 2 is 2, and 1 times 9 is 9. It's important to note that these two answers are identical. 42 189ths is the same as 2 ninths. It's the same amount of, same quantity. Most teachers don't mind if you are not reducing. So again, if you don't worry about reducing, simply just multiplying the numerators and denominators is how you multiply fractions. When you're dividing fractions, let's take, say, 3/5 divided by 1/7. Again, you do not need to have a common denominator to divide fractions. To divide fractions, you invert and multiply. I'm going to write that down here. Invert and multiply. This means to take the fraction you're dividing by, invert means to flip it over and then multiply it by the initial fraction. So this question would turn into 3/5 times, instead of 1/7, 7 over 1. You multiply the tops and you multiply the bottoms. This question gave us an improper fraction. Again, you can ask your teacher if improper fractions are valid as answers. They typically are fine. If you see a question like this, 2/7 divided by 3/4, again, you're dividing fractions. You still want to invert and multiply. You invert the second fraction, either the bottom fraction or the second fraction in the division statement. So this question becomes 2/7 times 4/3, which is 8 over 21 as a final answer. So in summary, adding or subtracting, you need a common denominator, sometimes called LCD by your teacher for lowest common denominator, and then you add or subtract the tops, and you leave the denominator. When you're multiplying, just multiply tops and bottoms. Or numerators and denominators if you want to be formal. And when you're dividing, the phrase to remember is invert and multiply. Again, thanks for watching. If you'd like some more practice or some more information, feel free to peruse the links at the bottom of this page underneath this video. Have a good day.